When the FBI started investigating the home of Don Miller in rural Indiana, some of his neighbors were angry. Don Miller was 91 years old, a philanthropist, a veteran who worked on the Manhattan Project. All this fuss over a few arrowheads? The FBI agent who knocked on his door was Tim Carpenter, and in his book, The Grave Robber, he shares how Don Miller stole nearly 42,000 priceless artifacts and human remains from around the world, and the FBI's massive investigation to set things right. That's coming up on Afterwards from C-SPAN. This is Afterwards from C-SPAN. This week, former FBI investigator Tim Carpenter talks about his time leading the FBI's art crime team and his book, The Grave Robber, the biggest stolen artifacts case in FBI history, and the Bureau's quest to set things right. He sat down with Dave Bass, who also served on the FBI's art crime team at the Boswell Book Company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in December of 2025.
I'm really thrilled. This is a very special event for me because I was an agent here in Milwaukee, and I was also part of the FBI crime team. And kind of putting the picture together, Tim and I was one of the first ever agents that was assigned to the FBI art crime team back in 2004. And then I had the great pleasure of meeting Tim along the way, and we became great friends, colleagues, and now in post-retirement since October 1st of just a little while ago, business partners now. So it's a special treat for me to be able to be here tonight with Tim. So thanks, Tim. And to get started, Tim, you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Is there anything else you need to add?
Yeah, so hi, everybody. Half this room knows me really well, so we're going to start off. I have to acknowledge I've got a lot of family and friends in the room. Harriet up front's my wife's mother. She may have had something to do with this event tonight. So a little round of applause for Harriet. Thank you very much for setting this up. I won't bring you up here and make you talk. I said I would, but no, listen, I'm real thrilled to be here. We appreciate everybody turning out, especially in the weather. We'll get through this. We're going to have a lot of fun. We decided I like the moderator kind of guest speaker style a little bit more than standing up and reading a chapter or doing those things. That doesn't really appeal to me. I like to talk. And we're going to have a good time. We're going to laugh. We're going to tell some stories. I expect questions from all of you, okay? This is the only way we're going to have fun with this. So what didn't come out in my bio is I, too, am retired from the FBI. I actually beat Dave out the door a little bit. I retired about 1.5 years ago as the former head of the FBI's art crime team, which was really the honor and privilege of my entire 33 years of government service. It was the best job I had in the government. What a great team. We actually don't refer to each other as the team. We're family. And I do want to take just a second to point out that Dave also is ex-military and a veteran as well and deserves our appreciation for that in his service. So thank you. So let's talk about The Grave Robber. You guys came here to hear about the book, right? So I'm going to start on page 1. We're going to read. No, I'm not going to do that. So.
Well, first, I like to always start out with a joke. So how many FBI agents does it take to change a light bulb? Any guesses? So it's actually 3. 1 to actually change the bulb, a 2nd to write a memoir about it, and then a 3rd to do a podcast. So I sort of stole that joke, by the way, from the Navy SEALs, because they always get blamed for doing podcasts and memoirs. But I think the point of that joke is that FBI agents can have very exciting careers and things that happen, along their careers. And I mean, me personally, I have a friend in the audience, Frank Allman. He and I were involved in the Lipinski Stradivarius theft right here in Milwaukee several years ago. Many of you remember. So thanks for coming out, Frank. Good to see you. So with that in mind, I think the first question I want to start out with Tim is, a show of hands, how many of you knew before tonight that the FBI had an art crime team? Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
We don't normally get
that many. So that means you're well-read, highly intelligent, and
or they all know me.
generally good people, or you're related to Tim. Okay. So that makes sense. But I think, Tim, why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about becoming an FBI agent, and more importantly, becoming an FBI art crime team agent.
Yeah, so I talk about this a little bit in the book. Quick show of hands, how many of you have already read it or in the process versus you plan to read it? Okay, good. So I'll do my best not to give you too many spoilers. I don't want to just out the whole book for you. Hopefully you'll read it and you'll enjoy it. So my background, you heard in the intro that I was a bomb technician, right? So I did that for a long time, almost 30 years as a bomb technician. I still have all my fingers. It's fine. What a juxtaposition, though, right? Really strange. I get teased the most about that I was a bomb technician and I was the art crime guy. That doesn't really work, but it worked for me. And I had just really a great privileged career. I think, look, I was the product of post 9/11 FBI, like so many of our generation of FBI agents. I was a police officer the day 9/11 happened, and I was a military reservist. I was an EOD guy in the Air Force, and so when the towers fell, that morning I'd been working all night as a police officer, and I'd come home to sleep, and somebody called me when the first plane hit. I got the phone call, woke me up, you need to turn on your television. The second plane hit. I stood there for a minute, thought about it. Then I called my sergeant at the police department and said, hey, I think you'll need to find a replacement for me. I don't think I'll be here in a few days. And 10 days later, I was activated back to active service at the outset of the war. And so I think many of our generation of FBI agents have that exact same kind of story, right? That we came in and it was a natural progression for us to continue our public service, to come into the FBI and continue to do what we did for the American people. In our case, at the beginning on the War on Terror, so no surprise, I was a bomb technician, right? Explosives, weapons of mass destruction. What do you think I did in the FBI when I first came in? Counterterrorism, right? So like so many, I didn't know that the FBI worked art crime either. Even as a brand new baby agent, I wasn't really thinking about that either. But I had a background in art, so I really wanted to be an artist and had intended to go to art school. In fact, had a scholarship to the Memphis School of Art doesn't exist anymore. But a little thing called Desert Storm happened at the time, and I decided to enlist in the military, and I went that direction, which was probably a great thing for the art market because I was never really any good at it, but I liked it. So I found myself at this great crossroads later that I'm in the FBI. I start hearing whispers about this art crime program that was in its infancy. I came into the FBI in 2004. The team didn't form officially, technically, until January of 2005. So it too was in its infancy. I was in my infancy as an FBI agent. The two paths just kind of met, ended up in the right place at the right time in the Miami field office, and found myself in the right position. And it was kind of like the bully in the schoolyard. I started throwing some elbows pretty hard, forcing my way to the front of the line and telling the bosses, I'm taking all of those cases. And they were happy to indulge me on that. They're like, fine, we don't care, you take the art cases. And so that's how I got started on it. And who knew, right, back in those days that it would turn out to be this wonderful program, and we had all of the great successes, and we built just a really great organic team and all the experts that we did over the years. So right place at the right time.
Right. There's actually been more people in space than have served on the FBI art crime team.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's we get asked this question quite a bit. How do you become an FBI art crime agent? And I think Tim said the magic word there is luck, timing, right place, right time. But first you have to be an agent. So you don't get to just join the bureau and do what you want to do. They have a different opinion about that. So
they do.
Yeah.
And it's important, right? I don't want to go off topic too much, but I ran the art crime program for a number of years at our headquarters. So I get this question frequently about how do I get onto the team? I would get phone calls from FBI agents, and I would get phone calls from folks on the outside looking to come into the FBI, thinking that maybe they could come into the bureau and be an art crime agent on day one. Of course, it doesn't work that way. As Dave said, you got to be an agent first, and we have a process in place. But normally what I would tell folks is, look, I don't really care that you have an art history degree or that you were an archaeologist or your parents ran a gallery. Those things are great, that's helpful, but what I need you to be first is an effective FBI agent, because we're working criminal investigations, right? This is what we do. We work criminal cases that just happen to involve cultural property. So if you're not a good agent and you can't work a criminal case effectively, you're no help. So number one, be a good, effective agent. Number two, do you understand why we do this work? As you all might imagine, in law enforcement, cultural property crime is not seen as a terribly sexy kind of program to work, right? Most young agents want to work gangs and drugs and terrorism and those kinds of things. And so oftentimes we have to justify maybe why cultural property crime and art crime is important. So for me, it was always answer those two questions. If you're a good agent and you understand why this is important, then we want you on this team. We can teach you everything else that you need to know. I can teach you the difference between a Manet and a Monet, but I can't make you a good agent, right? So we needed that first. So.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, that one of the things that we look for is people that are passionate about art. Mm-hmm. And because if you're not passionate about it, it's probably not the right thing for you to be involved in. And I also would real quick just point out that not all of us, being an art crime agent was a specialty and not necessarily something we did full time. So I was a regular field agent. I did kidnapping investigation, drugs, gangs, public corruption, crimes against children, all that. But when the need happened, I would, take my skills as an art crime agent and would deploy around the world, a myriad of situations, covert work, undercover work, whatever was needed. So I just want to make that clear that even though we do have a few full-time agents that work nothing but art crime, but they're usually like in New York City, maybe in Miami, things like that. So moving right along, and going back to the point that I made up front about FBI agents having exciting careers, and I think any good agent that did a lot of great work would have the types of situations happen that could be a book or a movie. So I think my question to you, Tim, at this point is and I think it's important to note the Miller investigation, which he's going to talk about, I was also a part of. So I worked with Tim on that case. And so Tim, at what point in that investigation did it occur to you that I need to write a book about this? And why?
Probably about the moment that I got called a Nazi in social media was the moment I realized I needed to write a book. I say that sort of in jest, but not really. I got called all kinds of terrible things by the public when we did this case. You might understand, right, the FBI, we don't talk about active investigations. You often hear law enforcement, not just the FBI, but the local police, anybody engaged in law enforcement. What are the two words you hear the most? No comment, right? And there's a reason that we do that. It's not just because we don't want to talk to you or share the information that we have, but we're trying to protect the integrity of not only the investigation itself, but potential prosecution. So anything that we say publicly can be twisted, it can be used against us. So we tend to be tight-lipped. This case, the Miller case, was no different. As we were executing this investigation on Don Miller, we were pretty much no comment. So what happens when we do no comment is we create a vacuum of information. And what does the public tend to do when there's a vacuum? They fill it with whatever they want, right? And it tends to be garbage most of the time. And so that happened in this case. I think the public perception was that we were targeting this poor 91-year-old philanthropist, well-known individual, pillar of the community that is Don Miller, a hero, an American hero in a lot of ways. Let's not take away from that. The crimes that he committed don't detract from the great things that he did for our country, and we can talk about that in just a minute. But the public had this perception that the FBI was just being really heavy-handed and we were targeting this man for no reason, and that they said we were out there stealing his arrowheads and all of these things. What do you think that the media and the public didn't know about that case, for those of you who've actually read the book already? They didn't know that Don Miller had the remains of 500 human beings in his house, that we recovered 2,000 bones from Don Miller, that he was robbing graves and digging up children and babies and bringing them home. They didn't know any of that because we said no comment. And so the public had this very negative view of the FBI related to the case. Not the mainstream media. I think the mainstream media did okay by us, but it was social media and the general public that really just didn't understand why we were doing the case, what we were doing. And so I felt like the only way to set the record straight is to write a book and tell the true story. And so that's what The Grave Robber is. It's a narrative nonfiction. It is a true story. I'm just giving it to you how it happened. It's factual. I try not to lead you as the reader into conclusions. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Was Don Miller a good guy, a bad guy, a criminal, a product of his environment? You decide. I just present you the facts like a good FBI agent does, right? We don't make prosecutorial decisions. We just present facts. And so that's what we've tried to do in this book, and maybe to dispel this notion that somehow the FBI acted inappropriately. My hope is that you read the book about Don Miller and the crimes that he did commit and the actions that we took. And the takeaway is, in fact, I'm pretty proud of the FBI and the work that the art crime team did on this case. We did this case not because we secured prosecutions. No one went to jail in this case. Don Miller was 91. He passed away before we could finish this case. So no one ever went to prison. We didn't claim massive statistical accomplishments and all of these things that law enforcement agencies want. We did this case because it was the right thing to do. And I hope that's the takeaway that you get from reading the book, that you should be proud of the work that the FBI did. We don't always get acknowledgement for the great work. Sometimes they focus on the bad stuff that happens. But we are doing good work. A lot of really talented and dedicated agents out there doing amazing stuff. So.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
And somewhat related to that, Tim, a lot of times in the media and in the court of public opinion, we hear the words, "Don't you have anything better to do or more important to do?" Talk about that a little bit in larger terms, above and beyond, particularly the Miller case.
Okay. Before I directly address that, let me go back a little bit. It occurs to me that maybe we're putting the cart before the horse here. How many of you are at least somewhat familiar about the case, even if you've not read the book? Have you ever even heard of the case? Okay, so maybe we have put the cart before the horse here. So let's go back just a minute. So we're talking about 2014, rural Indiana, an individual by the name of Don Miller. Don was a collector. He was an artifacts collector. So he collected anything he could get his hands on, whether it was Civil War, Revolutionary War memorabilia, it didn't matter, archaeological material, paleontological material, but his passion was Native American cultural objects and then some foreign cultures. About half of his collection was domestic and half was international in scope. I want to give you some perspective on the size of his collection. So in our experience and our history in the art crime team, when we encounter these private collectors that might amass these types of collections, in 2013, if you would have asked us what constituted a large collection, I probably would have said, 500-600 pieces would be a large collection. So Don Miller had 42,000 objects in his collection, most of which, not all, but most of which were illegally obtained or improperly obtained. So they were looted over the course of about 60 years. And so again, I teased you, I already kind of spoiled that. It wasn't just archaeological material, pots and funerary objects and all these other things that we were recovering. We also encountered a large amount of human remains, which we did not expect. We knew that he had a few. I think we expected maybe a dozen, but what we encountered was somewhat different. He lived on a 10-acre property with 10 acres of manicured property in the middle of a 720-acre farm. But within that 10 acres, there were multiple buildings, 2 houses, there was a bomb shelter, a tunnel. We didn't open a cabinet, a closet door, open a tote bin, garbage bags. paper grocery sacks, you name it, we opened it, it contained human remains. Everywhere we turned, we were uncovering human remains, which we were not expecting. Really altered the course of our investigation. So anyway, I don't want to give away the book. I want you to read the book and understand the case, but so that you have some context to what we're talking about up here tonight. This was the investigation. So we had a tip that came in that this man had this collection, had amassed it over the course of 60 years. Much of it was illegal. So I paid Don a visit as an FBI agent. And the great thing about this case is I didn't have to do some kind of deep undercover operation. This wasn't, some secret squirrel thing we did as the FBI. We just knocked on his door and said, "Hey, I'm with the FBI. Can I come in and look at your collection?" "Come on in." Whoa. And like most of these collectors, he likes to talk. He's proud of the collection. He wants to talk about the collection. So my job is to do what? Listen. Let him talk, right? Maybe I'd probe him. "Hey, tell me about that piece," or "Tell me about that piece." Oh, he loved to tell me about these pieces. He'd tell me about, "I was on this reservation and I was using a metal detector and I found it in this field and I did this." Well, that's what we call evidence, right? Those are clues for us to build probable cause. So that was the foundation. I think you all understand I'm skipping quite a bit. I'm going to let you read the book. But this was the foundation of that case. So we really were doing a good predicated criminal investigation that we found that he was indeed amassing this collection and had engaged in this kind of activity for years. What was interesting about it is the day the tip landed, or the next day when the tip landed on my desk, I just went into FBI systems like you might think I would do, and I'm searching his name, right, in our systems. What do we know about him? Well, what do we find? I find immediately that the FBI had been to his house 5 years earlier in 2008 on an allegation that he had a nuclear bomb trigger in his house. Now, Don had been part of the Manhattan Project. He was on Oppenheimer's team and helped design the radio systems out there at Los Alamos. Now, Don liked to claim, he told all of us, that he was the man that fired the test device at Trinity. I can't confirm that or corroborate it. We've worked with DOE and their historians. We know that he was there. He was in the bunker. I doubt that he was, I'm pretty sure Oppenheimer did that. Nevertheless, he was engaged in that. And then later on, he went to the Bikini Atoll and was involved in the testing there. So he had this fascinating history. He was a college professor, had a PhD, had 2 master's degrees, very intelligent man. It was a Jekyll and Hyde thing. He had this public persona. He was a missionary, built churches, restored covered bridges for the community, did all this great stuff. And then over here, on the weekends, he was digging up graves and robbing crypts in New Orleans and stealing bodies out of burial caves in Papua New Guinea and Easter Island and all of these crazy things he was doing. All right, so I don't want to bounce all over the map here. I just was trying to drop some Easter eggs for you guys to why this case is important and why I think it was fascinating to write a book about it. These people do exist in the world. They're fascinated with the dead and stealing bodies. All right, so get me back on track, Dave. Let's go back to the question.
I think you did a great job there of covering the direction that I was going in. So you're talking about Don Miller, the man, and him being a passionate collector. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about the difference between an ethical, responsible collector and some of the types of people that we encountered.
Yeah, so we refer to these types of folks as pot hunters. It's kind of a layman's generic term that's used across the industry as pot hunters. They go out and they look for indigenous sites, whether they're grave sites, documented marked grave sites or unmarked grave sites, maybe village sites, wherever, and they dig. So if you talk to anybody like Don, he even wrote a book. Don was a published author on amateur archaeology. He would refer to himself as an amateur archaeologist. But how many of you think that an educated, degreed archaeologist conducts archaeology with a backhoe? Anybody? That's not archaeology, right? Do we all agree that's not how archaeologists do? So that's what pot hunters do. They use backhoes and they use bulldozers. They just tear things up. They don't document. They don't preserve the context right? We lose all of the context and the value in the material that they're doing. And they probe with rebar, and they're looking for depressions in the ground, and they really just do quite a bit of damage. But in their own minds, and we've interviewed hundreds of these folks, they perceive themselves as archaeologists. Well, I'm preserving it in history, otherwise it would be lost to history. And I had this conversation with Don, particularly if we're talking about funerary objects or human remains. It never occurs to them, maybe you weren't meant to dig it up and find it and preserve it, right? So I like to say the Don Miller case, we talk about it as an art crime case, but it's not really an art crime case. What kind of case is it? It's a human rights case. This is about human dignity. When you die, whatever your burial rights are, and your specific religion or spiritual beliefs, doesn't matter, we all have them. If you bury a loved one in a coffin burial, and you put their Rolex or a necklace or their favorite suit or whatever, a book, whatever, into their coffin, you do so with the understanding that some jerk's not going to come along in 50 years and dig them up, take that home and stick it up on his fireplace, right? Do we all agree on that? This is basic human dignity that we're talking about. And so people like Don Miller don't see it that way. He felt entitled, whether it was a grave from 50 years ago, 100 years ago, or 500 years ago, he was entitled to it just because it was there and he was preserving it. And this is the mentality of pot hunters and these types of collectors. And this is what I hope the book, one of the big purposes of the book is to highlight that this crime does continue and it occurs daily across the United States. And maybe it's time for us to put a stop to it as a people, as a culture, to say it's not okay and we're not going to tolerate this anymore, because it's a human rights issue.
Exactly. And the one thing I would add to that is that any archaeologist will tell you that if you walk into a collection and you see pristine examples of certain types of objects that are just in unbelievable condition and better than what you might see in a museum, that's an immediate red flag that they were probably looted from a gravesite or a tomb. And I could tell you that that's one of the impressions that was left on me working with the objects in that case is they were just super impressive. I mean, he had things in his collection that the Smithsonian could only dream of having on display. They were that good. It was a world-class collection. So, Tim, I think I can tell by the audience that they've got questions. So I think at this point, if you're okay with it, we're going to go ahead and start taking some questions.
I like this part better.
Yeah.
Let's just answer questions.
Okay. So I think we'll start right up here with this young lady.
Who was the tipster? So I got to be careful with this. You understand when anybody that retires from the FBI writes a book, we have to go through a pre-publication review process with the FBI if we're going to write about something we did on the job. It's kind of a painful process, it's time consuming, but they want to make sure we're not disclosing national security information, classified stuff, these kinds of things. So one of the things I'm not allowed to do is disclose who the tipsters are, because if you were to call in a tip tonight to the FBI, you should trust and hope that we would keep your information confidential. We all agree on that? So I'm going to keep that confidential. They were close to the Millers, and I do talk about that a little bit in the book, and they had intimate knowledge of the collection. But this was a poison pen. Have any of you heard this term before, poison pen? We talk about this a lot in law enforcement, right? It's where the motive is I'm mad at you, Dave's upset me, I'm mad at him, so I'm going to drop a dime on him and get him in trouble. This is kind of the concept. So the motive sucks. We don't like the motive, but it was true, right? Poison pens can be true. And so in this case, it was a poison pen motivated tip, but it was factual and true. So these folks were close to the Millers and had this intimate knowledge. One might question why they knew about it for years, but there was a specific event that occurred that upset them, and only then did they decide to report it to law enforcement. And we got beat up a little bit in the press over this. His collection was well known through the community. He had Boy Scout troops and Girl Scout troops and church people that would come through his house, and he liked to show it off. So a lot of the comments were, "Where have you been, FBI? Like, everybody's known about this for the last 20 years. He's had this stuff in his house." Well, we didn't know about it. And the moment we did know about it, we handled it.
Well, and to be fair, the Boy Scout troops, they weren't seeing the remains. Okay, they were. It was a very directed tour, and he was super careful about who he showed what. And
Very
it was
true.
the actual behind the scenes that was problematic.
The shocking things that might have caused someone to take a moment and to object were carefully hidden away behind locked doors. So.
And it was only close family members and close friends that knew about that. Okay, so next question, Christine.
Do you have an inventory or any kind of written record?
So the question is, did he have an inventory of written records? Boy, don't I wish. So his looting career spanned about 60 years. It was very prolific, and when I say it was global, I mean global. So we know, we found his travel documents to over 100 countries. He would claim 200. Of course, there aren't 200 countries that are close to it, but I understand his point. He was extraordinarily well traveled. He did some fascinating things. So because he was part of the government for a while, back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, he would oftentimes travel as a government employee, as the Department of Energy and later as the Atomic Energy Commission. He would travel around the world on government travel, and then he would loot on the weekends and secret looted material on government flights to avoid customs getting back into the country. So he did a lot of that. He would do missionary trips. He was very fond of Haiti, so he traveled in and out of Haiti frequently on missionary trips, and he would build churches during the week and steal objects on the weekends. He's been arrested. He had been arrested a couple of times in Mexico and Haiti and a few other places, but it never gave him a moment of pause. He just continued to do this for 60 years. So no great documentary evidence. So his wife, for a while, kept a journal. We found that pretty useful. She would basically draw a roadmap where some of these things were looted, but the vast majority of the collection was undocumented. However, what he was prolific with was the camera. And so we seized 18,000 still photos from Don and about 400 hours of reel-to-reel, 8mm, 16mm, and later VHS, all of that media for 50 years worth of film. We found that to be quite useful. But I would have loved some site records. That would have been great. What he would do is write, like on a skull or on an object, sometimes he would take a Sharpie and he would just write the site on the skull. So that's a clue for the FBI, right? Whoever, I'll let you manage the questions.
What was the repatriation efforts like? Because I can imagine with all that, it was a mess.
What a great question. What was the repatriation effort like? Difficult and long, so 10 years. So this was a 10-year-long case. We started this in April 1st of 2014 was day one of our operations. I retired in February of 24. February 24. We finished repatriations right before I retired in 24. So 10 years that it took. So repatriations, we have to classify those in two different categories. Domestically, right, to the Native American community, and then everything else that was international. Frankly, the international material is a lot easier because we kind of know who to talk to. We have those state-to-state relationships already. And generally speaking, it's easier to culturally affiliate the international material. Now, that's not always super simple. I want you to consider this. We like to think of the world today in modern context, right? You know the world today based on the world map today. But much of the material that we seized and collected were from cultures and civilizations from 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. So if we're talking about Aztec material, who does it belong to, Peru or Ecuador? That gets tricky, right? That gets really tricky. Or an actual example, we see several Tibetan Kapala. So those are human skulls that they cut in half, not it's not macabre. This is an honor in Tibet, under Tibetan culture, to have this done, and they decorate them with jewels and gold and turn them into ceremonial bowls. Well, we'd see several of these, but they're from Tibet. Well, how many of you know that Tibet was annexed by China? And the Tibetan government's in exile. And so, really difficult situation for me, because we had to return those to China and not Tibet. And I was not happy. They don't belong to China. But at the state level, this is what you do. So it's not always super simple to repatriate the international stuff. There are challenges for that. But by far, the Native American material is much more complex. 583 federally recognized tribes. That number changes a little bit from year to year. I don't know exactly what the number is today. But to give you some context, how many countries are represented at the United Nations? 176, I think, is the number. Right about that. Have you ever seen the United Nations agree unanimously on anything? Ever? Nope. So now multiply that by 3 to all the federally recognized tribes, and then that doesn't include the state recognized tribes, and it gets complicated, is all I can say about it. It's a very difficult process, but a worthwhile process, and something I was very grateful to experience, because I learned an awful lot from the travel.
And I could tell you real quick on the repatriations, China, for example, those items that were returned to China, I was over in China in December of 2019. Also, something else was happening over in China at that same time, but I was there as an art crime agent, and it was amazing to me that in all their government buildings, they had giant photos of the repatriation ceremony on the wall, and we were treated exceptionally well, because they were so grateful for that simple repatriation. So a lot of these kind of help international relations. And
I know there's a lot of questions. I'm going to get to everybody, but one last thing, I'm going to tap onto this thing about repatriations. So Haiti, for example. I often get asked about this book and doing these speaking tours, what was the most impactful repatriation that I did? All of them is the answer. They all were impactful. But to give you some idea, Haiti, we returned about close to 500, I don't remember the exact number, it was close to 500 pieces to Haiti. And at the time we did that repatriation, the Haitian government told me we were the first country ever to return Haiti's looted and stolen cultural heritage. They'd never received anything back from anywhere in the world. And in doing so, we tripled the size of their national collection. And so how do you put a price tag on that? How do you calculate the benefit of that, right? The cultural and diplomatic benefits of it. I'm sorry. I'm going to let you do questions.
Go ahead.
I just want to know, is everything repatriated, or do we still have a collection that's not a common?
Great question. Was everything repatriated? All right, so I told you at the beginning, we counted 42,000 objects in his collection. So to be clear, we did not seize 42,000. We were prepared to do so. But let's face it, some of the material was legal. We're not there to take legal stuff, right? Stuff that he owns lawfully. You don't want us to do that. You want protections from the FBI. So we were trying to just seize material that we could legally defend. It was problematic or illegal. So we seized in total 7,000 objects out of the 42,000. Much of the 42,000 contained pottery shards, points, arrowheads, things that we wouldn't seize in the first place, right? Nobody wants them. There's nothing to do with that material. So of the 7,000, we knew about, again, half of that was international, half was domestic. Dave will remember at the very beginning in 2014, I was clear to FBI executives all the way to the director's office that at the end of this case in 10 years, and I told them on day one it would take 10 years, there will be a small percentage of objects that will never be able to culturally affiliate. We knew it from the outset. Right now, there are about 15 pieces at FBI headquarters out of the 7,000 that we cannot culturally affiliate. We've consulted every expert on the planet we can find. We just can't figure it out. I'm retired, it's not my problem anymore. I think ultimately what happens to those most likely is they are converted to government use and they go into the FBI museum is my guess, and they'll be curated that way. But
Yeah, or they become training materials for on how to package artifacts.
But
Like
everything
that.
is gone. Everything is home with the exception of those handful of pieces. So we hit our marks. I'm very proud of that work. We stuck it at 10 years, and everything went home.
Yeah.
C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast continues in a moment. Now back to C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast.
Okay, so go ahead, sir.
Okay, from your first meeting with Don Miller, how long did it take you to build the case so you could start sieging?
Great question. From our first meeting, how long did it take to build a case? So on the first meeting, he gave me enough evidence to arrest him. But he was 91 years old. So we got beat up on this quite a bit from the media, and the tribal community to this day still gives me a lot of grief about the fact that we didn't arrest Don Miller. So let me just address that. I talk about this in the book a little bit, so again, I'm sorry for spoilers, but here's the reality. First and foremost, the FBI doesn't make charging decisions. Right? You hear this in the press all the time. It's not what we do. We don't decide to charge a person. We investigate a crime. We present our investigation, our findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's their job to decide who gets charged. Right? We all understand that? At the end of the day, as heinous as these crimes might be, that they're human rights crimes, these are terrible cultural property crimes and long and prolific crimes, in the criminal justice system in the United States, they are still considered nothing more than a property crime. Okay? That's how they're classified, as a property crime. Who in here thinks that the Department of Justice of the United States has the will or desire to prosecute a 91-year-old man for a property crime?
Who's also in failing health.
Failing health, and here's the truth. Here's the reality. I couldn't say this when I was on the job, but I'm retired. I can say what I want.
To a degree.
To a degree. Don Miller likely would not have survived the charging process. Had I arrested him, thrown him in handcuffs, and carted him down to the U.S. Marshal's office to put him into intake and processed him, stuck him in jail, take him to an initial appearance in court, the process likely would have resulted in his death. Does anyone in here think that that's the right thing to do? It's not the right thing to do. So I get the passion and the emotion behind, well, he should have been charged, he deserved to be held accountable. But he probably didn't deserve a death sentence for it. I think our job, here's the thing, I talk about this a lot. I want to leave you all with this on this topic. I want you to go home and consider this issue of justice. Our job is to deliver justice, not punishment. And Americans, we forget this from time to time. There's a sense in this country that we're here to punish people as law enforcement. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to hold you accountable and to deliver justice to the victims of your crimes and to the society. I feel like we did that in Don's case, don't you? We seized his life's work. It wasn't our aim, but effectively we destroyed his reputation in the process. I feel like we served justice pretty well, and we didn't have to submit him to that process where he might not have survived it. So, anyway.
Okay, we're getting toward the end. We're going to do this last question here.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on those thoughts. And I only know about like NAGPRA here in the United States, but were the tribes given the opportunity to consult on the case, or were they able to be a part of that process?
What a fantastic question. So the question is, were the tribes invited to consult? I'm not going to go too deep. I wrote a whole chapter about this in the book about NAGPRA and ARPA. If you've read the book, you'll know I'm not a super fan of NAGPRA or ARPA or the STOP Act. I'm even a less fan of the STOP Act.
A fan in the sense of the way it's written.
The way it's written. So I don't want to go too deep because it's legal stuff. You guys are going to like roll your eyes up. NAGPRA is a really difficult acronym that stands for the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. There you go, NAGPRA. I'm not going to get into it too deep. It is a legal framework, a federal law, and a set of regulations that try to protect tribal heritage and cultural patrimony that belongs to the tribes. The problem with NAGPRA from our perspective is it wasn't written for law enforcement, right? It contemplates institutions, museums, and academia that hold collections. Congress, their intent was never to incorporate an agency like the FBI into NAGPRA. Unfortunately, there's an unfortunate word in that statute that says federal agency. Well, that includes us. So we're now subject to NAGPRA, but it's a broken law for us because we also have evidentiary rules that we have to abide by. And a lot of times those things conflict. So enough on that. I don't want to deep dive on that. But yes, so in the past, when the FBI or other agencies have had similar types of cases, I think they long made mistakes where they treated the tribal community as a victim, right, as an afterthought. We'll talk to you at the end. Well, that wasn't my model. My model was, no, they're partners. They're not victims, they're partners. And we brought them in day one. In fact, day one of the actual seizure, so this was a 6-day operation at Miller's Farm. Day one, April 1st, was just, oh my God, what do we have, right? Just walking around. So I want you to consider this. It was not quite as big as this bookstore, but it wasn't that much smaller. Wall to wall, floor to ceiling, artifacts as far as you could see. What now, right? So day one is just, okay, we got to have a plan, execute our plan. So day two is when we actually started seizing operations. At lunchtime, in the middle of this operation, I left the scene to go host a tribal consultation. No one had ever done that before. And we had the tribes on site, on scene, which no one had ever done before because it's an active law enforcement operation. It's a crime scene. And we brought the tribes to the crime scene. They were there offering prayers, spiritual guidance, giving guidance to us on how to handle their ancestors respectfully. That was a big piece of this. We don't want to make mistakes. We're not here to make it worse. We're here to help. So we brought them in at the very beginning, and I dare say that is a model change for the federal government writ large, and we've written new policies on this. And the entire federal government has kind of adopted this methodology because of the Don Miller case on how to work with the tribal community.
And I would say as an FBI agent, I've been through multiple Native American ceremonies and meetings with tribal leaders and whatnot. Those are all things I never dreamed that I would do as an FBI agent, but that's what we did. So outstanding questions.
5 more minutes for questions.
Okay, last one.
I want to get
quick.
to questions. I know there's
real
some
quick. Last one.
In your book, during your tenure with the FBI, James Comey became the director.
Yeah. Yes, he did.
Your personal opinion.
Okay.
You're retired.
I'm retired. So's he. So the question was about my opinion of James Comey as the director of the FBI. So obviously I'm going to refrain from giving an opinion about that. But I will tell you this. James Comey called me to congratulate me on this case. And I dare say no other director had ever done that before.
Well, we love the name.
He called me, and James Comey wrote me a nice letter when my father died. And I'll stop there.
A real man's man.
Yeah, I remember him visiting our office here in Milwaukee. He was really cordial, funny, very tall, very, very tall.
I think we can, I know we said last one, but I see some more hands. They're saying I got a couple of minutes, so let's get to as many questions as we can. Let's go right back here real fast.
2 things that you mentioned. Number one was they were calling you Nazis. And secondly, that the media, if you don't tell them, they make it up. It made me recall the movie Monuments Men. Have you seen that?
Of course.
Is it anything like your experience? Is it factual? Is it phony? How do you feel about that?
The movie?
Yeah.
Well, we can talk afterwards. So I know Robert Etzel fairly well, and when Clooney made that movie, there's a whole story behind that. It was originally not going to be that movie. It was going to be more like Schindler's List, but they ran out of time and they made some changes. So they made it more humorous and less factual. So on one hand, it was less factual, which is disappointing, but on the other hand, and I've told Robert this a couple of times, that I think Clooney did him a favor because otherwise it would have been dark and not terribly entertaining. No one would have watched it, and his story would have been lost. The way Clooney made the movie was vastly entertaining, if not super factually correct, and therefore his book sales went through the roof, and it really highlighted the issue. And so I think it was a stroke of genius, the way they did it. So.
Yeah, I think John had a question here, Mr. Shannon.
This is a sidebar. You're in Milwaukee. Frank Bowman is here. He has his violin back. Could you give a little summary of that incident and the role that the FBI played in it?
Yeah, so just real succinctly, I would say that it was a remarkable job by the Milwaukee Police Department. It was a case that was, the Milwaukee Police Department contacted the FBI for assistance. I was a consultant from the FBI art crime team on that case. I got to meet Frank in very dire circumstances there, because you can imagine what Frank was going through. It was extremely cold. It was a lot of great detective work, and ultimately, we found it in the attic, it was the violin, and we were very happy afterwards. So it was a remarkable case, and it should be its own book someday, Frank. So,
yeah. Hint, hint. All right, one last final question, one more, last one. Sorry, y'all, last one.
In the back there.
Yeah, what did Don Miller think about your investigation?
What a good question. What did Don Miller think about our case? Well, I dare say he wasn't terribly happy with us. So again, Don is typical of pot hunters, right? That he thinks of himself as a protector. They don't see that their behavior is problematic, unethical, amoral, criminal, perhaps. They don't necessarily see it that way. I'm not here to demonize Don, and I took a lot of great pains writing this book to not do that. It's not my job to demonize him. It's not my job to try him in the court of public opinion. He was never afforded the opportunity to stand trial because he passed away. So I want to be cautious about that. I want you to form your own opinions about Don. I look at Don as a product of his era. So let's think about this. He was born in 1926, if my memory is correct, which means his grandfather very well could have fought in the last of the Indian Wars in the United States, right? And so when you understand the context of his socialization that he's subjected to, then maybe it starts to fall into place. I'm not excusing it. I'm trying to understand it. Don was just a racist. And I like to say more of a true racist, not necessarily in the form that we use that word frequently today, but to Don, these weren't human beings. I say this a lot, that he held the native ancestors, had no more moral equivalency to him than the grinding stone or the seed jar. They weren't people, they were just things to him. And I write about it, spoiler, it's in the book. I talk about this frequently. I'm quoted all the time about this. When we were seizing all of the human remains first. That was our very number one priority, is get the human beings out of the house. He got agitated and came to me. He was very angry when he saw us removing all the skeletal material from the house. And he said, "I thought you were here to take my pots. Why are you taking all of my Indians?" Well, now, I don't have time to get into great lengths of this. Read the book. It's in there. We were on consent. We had a warrant, but we didn't want to execute the warrant. There's reasons for that. And so when you're on consent, anybody can revoke consent. So keep that in mind. If you have an encounter with law enforcement, you have the right to refuse consent, right? You can revoke consent at any time. So as a law enforcement agency, it's my job to make sure he doesn't revoke consent. So we have to be really nice, right? We're playing really nice with him. But this was a really offensive thing that he said to me, like, just, why are you taking my Indians? And Dave was there. He'll tell you, it's the only time I ever kind of lost my cool. I had to super lose my cool with Don, but I wasn't happy. And I just told him, well, Don, you know, a lot of people might find what you've done to be terribly offensive. Like, you've been going around digging up graves. And not just digging up graves. He stole bodies out of crypts in New Orleans and cemeteries. I mean, he was a grave robber. I'm like, you know, Don, some people might find what you've done to be offensive. So, yeah, I'm taking all of your Indians. And he got mad, got in a huff, and he's just like, well, if it's just a bunch of dead Indians that make you squeamish, then go ahead and take them. And he turned around and stomped off. And so as he was walking away, I retorted, well, if that's the way you feel about it, you don't mind if I go down the street to the cemetery and dig up your grandparents, and I'll take them home and stick them on my mantle. Well, it pissed him off. Because going down to the cemetery and digging up his white grandparents is very different than going to the unmarked historical cultural cemetery and digging up Indians, or going to Papua New Guinea, or going to Easter Island, or Peru, or Mexico, or Ecuador, or Haiti, or all the other places he went to. You see the point I'm driving at? So, terribly offensive perspective on things, right? Like, not okay. And this is why we need to put an end to pot hunting in the United States. It's not okay.
I think that's a great point to end on. Real quick, our sponsor, a round of applause for having us here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our illustrious author. Thanks, Tim, for joining us tonight.
Thanks for listening to Afterwards from C-SPAN. You can watch more conversations with authors like this one every Sunday on C-SPAN 2's Book TV. Book TV and all the C-SPAN networks are now available to watch live on YouTube TV. Learn more at tv.youtube.com. And next week on Afterwards, a conversation about the fall of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX. Finance and tech reporter David Morris will talk about his book, Stealing the Future, Sam Bankman-Fried, Elite Fraud, and the Cult of Techno-Utopia.